Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Italy was shocked by a series of brutal crimes that grew into one of the most controversial and disturbing criminal cases in modern Italian history. It centered around a small circle of young people in the province of Varese, near Milan, who were part of the heavy metal scene, used drugs, and embraced occult and satanic symbolism. The media, struggling to frame the events, labeled this group the Beasts of Satan. The group was composed of individuals such as Andrea Icedin Volpe, Nicola Onis and Sapone, Paolo Ozzy Leone, Mario Ferocity, Maxion, Pietro Wedra Guerrieri, Marco Kill Zampalo, and Eros Caos Monterasso. Although not all were equally involved in every act of violence, their names became synonymous with some of the most horrifying crimes Italy had seen in decades. The first tragedy unfolded on the night of January 17, 1998, when 19-year-old Chiara Marino and 16-year-old Fabio Tallis disappeared after spending an ordinary Saturday night drinking beer and listening to metal at the Midnight Pub, a hub of the local metal scene. That evening, they were persuaded to leave with members of the circle and taken into the woods near Somma Lombardo, about 30 miles northwest of Milan. According to official records, what happened there was nothing short of horrific. Under the influence of drugs and amid heavy metal music and occult talk, group members told Chiara and Fabio that Chiara was to be sacrificed. When Fabio tried to protect her, both were attacked. Chiara was stabbed directly in the chest, and Fabio was beaten with a hammer and struck repeatedly until he died. Investigators later found that after killing them, the perpetrators buried their bodies in a pit in the woods and left them there. For nearly 6 years, their disappearance was treated by authorities as a possible runaway couple, until fresh evidence eventually revealed the truth. Over time, additional violent acts linked to the group came to light. In September 1998, another young member, Andrea Bontad, was psychologically pressured by the group and died by crashing his car. Authorities classified it as a suicide influenced by the group's dynamics. Then on January 24, 2004, 27-year-old Mariangela Pezzata, the ex-girlfriend of leader Andrea Volpe, was brutally murdered. Prosecutors later concluded that Sapone ordered her death because she was believed to know too much about the 1998 killings. Pezzata was shot and, according to autopsy findings, buried alive after being struck, but she did not die immediately, indicating a prolonged and agonizing death. When authorities uncovered the remains of these victims and linked them to the group's activities, the magnitude of the crimes transformed the case into national news. Investigators found evidence of violence involving knives, hammers, spades, and prolonged beatings, and the press seized on every gruesome detail, often foregrounding occult and satanic motifs in their coverage. Trials began in earnest in 2005. On February 22, 2005, Andrea Volpe was sentenced to 30 years in prison, and Pietro Guerrieri was sentenced to 16 years for their roles in multiple murders. Later in 2005 to 2006, other members of the circle were convicted and received long prison sentences, while Nicola Sapone, believed by prosecutors to be a mastermind, was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. Throughout the proceedings, reactions varied. Some families of victims felt that justice had been done, while others criticized the relative lightness of sentences or the focus on occult motives. The Beasts of Satan case became a flashpoint cultural phenomenon in Italy, a symbolic focal point for public anxieties about youth, subculture, music, and morality. Much like the satanic panic that gripped the United States in the 1980s and 1990s, when heavy metal music, role-playing games, and teenage nonconformity were sometimes interpreted as signs of moral danger, Italy wrestled with its own fears of hidden cults and ritual violence. Yet many scholars, journalists, and commentators have since noted that the role of media and public fear may have shaped the narrative as much as the actual evidence did. Drug use, group dynamics, aggression, and adolescent rebellion were deeply intertwined with symbolic and occult imagery, making it difficult to distinguish cultural aesthetics from actual criminal motive. The case also sparked artistic and cultural responses. Plays, documentaries, and films such as In Nomine Satan have revisited the events, each framing the story in ways that explore not just the crimes themselves, but their meaning in a broader social and psychological context. There are still unresolved aspects. Investigators have noted additional suspected deaths and disappearances in the same geographic area and time frame that could be linked to the group's activities, though none were ever conclusively proven in court. In international legal literature, when discussing criminal acts linked to satanic cults or attributed to occultism, there are very few cases recognized in criminal law textbooks and doctrine. Among these, the Beasts of Satan case in Italy and the famous Charles Manson case in the United States stand out, in which Manson committed cult-style murders in the 1960s. These two cases are often cited as rare instances in which criminal justice had to confront alleged cult-based violence within youth subcultures, although in both situations the interpretation of symbolic language and motive remains complex and debated. This comparison highlights just how rare convictions directly linked to alleged genuine satanic cults are in judicial history. The Manson case in the US and the Beasts of Satan case in Italy are among the most discussed and academically studied precisely because of their symbolic, cultural, and media legal complexity. Today is January 17th. It is the anniversary of Fabio Talla's death. This is not a date I chose intentionally. I did not decide to speak today for that reason. In fact, for years I've wanted to leave this case behind. Since 2014, or maybe 2015, I don't remember exactly. I retired from the bar and moved on to other work. So why are we talking about it now? Because a few days ago, on a Facebook group, Michele Tallis, the father of Fabio, one of the victims of the so-called Beasts of Satan, who disappeared on January 17, 1998, along with Chiara Marino, launched a public attack against me. It wasn't a harsh or violent attack in tone, but ironic, sarcastic. He wrote, "Greet the esteemed lawyer, congratulate him for the Brescia appeal he lost." In essence, he was mocking me. He then added that I have a guilty conscience, along with other similar accusations. I responded calmly. I did not attack him because I know perfectly well that Michele is acting in good faith. He lost a son, and for 10 years, he devoted his life to seeking the truth. This, it must be said, demonstrates boundless paternal love. Michele believed that the murderers were somewhere within the metal music scene his son frequented. So what did he do? He started going to those groups. He started listening to metal music. He dressed like them. He immersed himself in that environment for 10 years. Because, let's be honest, after Fabio Tallis and Chiara Marino disappeared, the police and Carabinieri did nothing for a long time. Then, after years, arrests were made. Nicola Sapone, Paolo Leone, Andrea Volpe, Marco Zampallo, and others. And officially, the case should have ended there. Over the years, Michele asked me several times to meet in Milan to talk. I never did, not out of disdain. When I went to Milan, it was for other reasons. I no longer worked on the case and didn't want to revisit it. Moreover, I had clearly sensed his disapproval of me. The tone was hostile, understandable from his point of view. He believes I was the lawyer for some of the murderers and therefore have a guilty conscience. And on one point, paradoxically, Michele is not wrong. If a lawyer knowingly defends a guilty person, making them appear innocent, there is moral responsibility. The legal code states that a lawyer must work with the magistrate to seek the truth. This principle is often ignored, but it does not apply to me. I have never defended anyone I believe to be guilty. If I had discovered a lie, I would have withdrawn from the case. When I accepted to defend Paolo Leone and Nicola Sapone in the retrial, I did so because I was convinced of their innocence. I told them clearly, if I discover even a single lie, I will leave, and everything we do will be public. And indeed, we published the trial documents. Everything had to be transparent. Paolo Leone contacted me after reading an interview I gave on Satanism published in X Times. He wrote, "I want nothing. I know I have a life sentence, but I want to understand why I am here." At first, I was influenced by what I had read in the newspapers. I thought, maybe they were involved after all. Then I started studying the trial documents. And I realized that, in my opinion, they were innocent. The difference is that I conducted real defensive investigations. I spent months in Milan. I slept at Leone's mother's house. I spoke with dozens of witnesses. I spoke with the victims' families. Not with Michele Tallis, because I knew he wouldn't listen to a different version. One episode struck me deeply. Flaviana Cassetta, mother of Doriano Mola, found dead, officially ruled a suicide by hanging with an electric cord, was convinced it was murder. At first, she insulted me. She said I was complicit with murderers. I replied, let's work together. If I'm wrong, it will come out. In the end, she became convinced that those young men were not involved. She decided to meet me. I didn't make it in time. She committed suicide with an electric cord, just like her son. I have never believed it was a suicide, not because I have contrary evidence, but because a mother who has been searching for the truth for years rarely takes her own life in the same manner as her child. Moreover, she had been threatened, followed. I asked her, if the boys are in prison, who is threatening you? A question that remained unanswered. Now we reached the central point of the discussion with Michele, the grave where Fabio and Chiara were buried. Depth, 1.9 meters. Width, 1.6 meters. Michele claims it could have been dug by hand. I conducted practical tests with a public landscaping technician. Using shovels and pickaxes, we could barely reach 10 to 20 centimeters. The ground was compact and rooted. To dig a grave of this size, a mechanical digger would have been needed. There's a technical fact. Excavator buckets have modular sizes, 40, 80, 120, 160 centimeters. The grave was 160 centimeters wide. Furthermore, the volume of earth moved would have been enormous. The forest is not isolated. It's near Sama Lombardo, frequented by people, with paths monitored by the provincial police. Is it possible that no one saw anything? In my opinion, that grave was dug with mechanical means, and this alone completely changes the scenario. I do not regret anything I did. However, for me, this was not a professional experience. It was a human experience, and, in a sense, also a spiritual one. It helped me understand, my own understanding, what the devil is, not in a folkloric sense, but as a mechanism. It showed me how certain power dynamics work, how certain forces move, how what we could call the invisible world operates. I want to share an episode related to this. At one point, a film about the beasts of Satan was released, In Nomine Satan, directed by Emanuele Sermon. Before the premiere, he called me and invited me. I refused. I said clearly, I won't come. I know the film will be based on trial documents and will portray these young men as guilty without exploring the judicial matter. I was also quite irritated by the release. He replied, it's not like that. The initial project was different, then I took over. I tried to put things in order in a way closer to your vision. In the end, I went to the premiere. The film tells the story of the beasts of Satan, but in the finale there's a twist. The real Satanist is not the convicted, but the prosecutor. There is a symbolic scene where Satan appears to the magistrate and says, "You sought me outside yourself, but I have always been next to you. I am inside you." The message is clear. The true manipulator of the case is the one who built the accusatory structure. After the premiere, the film was not released in theaters. Total block. The director called me. "Why do you think they are blocking everything?" I replied that the version presented was very strong and that Magistrate Peasy, still influential despite nearing the end of his career, would hardly have appreciated such a narrative. We're talking about a magistrate who had trapped Licho Jelly when he was untouchable, a real figure of power who knew institutional mechanisms perfectly. I said, as long as he is alive and influential, the film will hardly pass. A few months later, Peasy died. Soon after, the film was released. Everyone can draw their own conclusions. I am just reporting the facts as I experienced them. I do not have the truth in my pocket. But what I think, and I say this responsibly, is that the real culprits have not paid. Others are paying, and they are still paying today, especially those who never confessed. Nicolas Sapone, for example, never received sentence reductions he was entitled to by law. Why? Because he never confessed. The mechanism is always the same. Confess, and we will lighten your position. When I was Paolo Leone's lawyer, even the right to visits was not facilitated. I had to make endless trips at my own expense. I recall an episode. On December 30th, Paolo did not call his mother, as he usually did weekly. She was anxious. No information was given. On December 31st, I drove to San Remo personally. I spent midnight in a highway rest stop on the way back. This was my condition: personal expenses, time taken from work, no compensation. And I did it wholeheartedly. I stopped because I realized that no one cared about the truth. Not the magistrates. Not the investigators. Not even some of the victims' families. And, most painfully, not even all the prisoners involved. At some point, I asked myself, why should I sacrifice everything for something that no one truly wants to see through to the end? In the trial, there were witnesses who, judging by their biographies, had official contacts with structured Satanist environments. They distributed material, promoted esoteric groups. Yet they were never investigated. There was also the case of Patricia Silvestri, who cooperated by pointing to specific esoteric leads. Those leads were not pursued. Later, she was found dead, decapitated. The case was closed, blaming her husband. Here too, I simply record the facts. Everyone can assess them. I did my work in good faith. Did I make mistakes? Certainly. But I did not act out of personal interest. I did not write books about the case. I did not enrich myself. Professionally, it cost me everything. What I gained was understanding how the system works, how a narrative is constructed, how a symbolic culprit is created. For 40 years, I believed the official narrative. I do not feel superior to anyone. Some experiences, however, force me to see the system from the inside. And when you start seeing the mechanisms, you realize that public reality is often a simplified representation of far more complex dynamics. I do not ask that this interpretation be shared. I ask only that questioning never stops. Before we close, Compelling Topics would like to leave you with an image that may resonate with many viewers. In the 4th season of Stranger Things, the character Eddie Munson becomes the target of a community-wide moral panic. He is a metalhead, an outsider, a young man associated with dark music and fantasy culture. When a horrific crime occurs, suspicion immediately falls on him, not because of evidence, but because of what he represents. Eddie becomes a symbol, and that is the key word. Across different decades and different countries, societies sometimes react to tragedy by seeking not only a perpetrator, but a cultural embodiment of fear. The outsider, the nonconformist, the one who looks the part. This does not mean that crimes are imaginary. It does not mean that courts always err. But history shows that when symbolism fuses with prosecution, complexity can be reduced to narrative simplicity. The Beasts of Satan case, like many high-profile cases involving youth subculture, sits at that intersection. Eddie Munson is fiction, but the social mechanism that turns cultural difference into suspicion is very real. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode of The Night Side.